So Splatoon 3 is over a year old at this point, with the second drizzle season having just launched, and to say that the state of the game has been all over the place since it released would be an understatement. Splatoon 3 has a lot of great aspects, but it also has some issues, which is to be expected when you have a live service multiplayer game like this. Compared to the first two games in the series, Splatoon 3's structure of updates, balancing, and the like are very different, so I figured now that we've just crossed into the game's 1-year anniversary, I'd go ahead and look critically at its first year of content. I'm mostly going to be directly comparing this game to Splatoon 2, since that's 3's direct predecessor and had the most comparable life cycle compared to what we know of Splatoon 3's future. Splatoon 2 received 2 years worth of content updates, starting from the game's launch in July of 2017 through the Final Fest and the update which followed it in July of 2019. The game was then supported with a couple of bonus Splatfests, as well as balancing patches and bug fixes, all the way through November of 2022. In terms of new content for Splatoon 3, the pre-launch Splatoon 3 Direct straightaway stated that this game will have 2 years of new catalogs and weapons, which indicates that they plan to support it for about as long as they did 2. There's a chance they might support it longer, but for the purposes of this video, we're going to assume they're sticking to 2 years. But for now, let's compare Splatoon 2 after 1 year of updates to Splatoon 3 now after the new Drizzle Season update. We're going to be doing this as a sort of competition between the two games, rating each category based on the quantity and quality of the new content, and awarding a point for each one. So let's move into our first category, main weapons. The most consistent additions to both games post-launch were new weapons, both main weapons and alternate kits for existing ones, and stages, both new and returning from the previous games in the series. However, these two games have had very different update structures overall. Splatoon 2 opted for weekly updates, adding either a new weapon, kit, or stage once a week until June of 2018, almost a year after it launched. After this, the game would have one monthly update, usually adding 4 weapons/kits. Splatoon 3, on the other hand, has opted to have much larger scale updates at the start of a new season every 3 months. In terms of weapons, Splatoon 2 had 31 main weapons at launch, to which 17 new ones were added in its first year. Meanwhile, Splatoon 3 had a whopping 54 main weapons at launch, with 7 being added so far. So, in terms of main weapons, Splatoon 3 has added far less than Splatoon 2 did, meaning that Splatoon 2 earns the point for main weapon quantity. However, it's important to note that while Splatoon 3 launched with every main weapon Splatoon 2 had at the end of its life, Splatoon 2 didn't actually have every weapon from the first game at launch. In fact, the very first thing added to Splatoon 2 post-launch was the ink brush, which was added to the first game in a similar fashion. In total, 8 of the 17 weapons that were added to Splatoon 2 in its first year were originally from Splatoon 1, leaving only 9 to be completely original. And even then, 3 of those weapons were Brellas, and 3 more were Dualies. The only ones added that weren't part of these classes were the Squeezer, Explosher, and my beloved main, the Ballpoint Splatling. While I do love a lot of these weapons, like the aforementioned Ballpoint and the Dark Tetra Dualies, the lack of variety here really kills the momentum of these additions. Meanwhile, the 7 that have been added to Splatoon 3 so far have not only all been completely original, but have also all been part of different main weapon classes. The only classes to not yet receive a new main weapon are, fittingly, the Dualies and Brellas, alongside Splatoon 3's new classes, Stringers and Splatanas. And while some of these new weapons may have ended up being lackluster in terms of usability, sorry Chill Season weapons, I still think the overall concepts of some of them are excellent. Stuff like the Dreadringer, Paintbrush, and especially the S-Blast are already fantastic, with weapons like the Snipe Rider and Big Swig Roller really only needing some fine-tuning and or new kits to be better. So in terms of main weapon quality, I'm gonna give the point to Splatoon 3. Now, the number of new weapon kits, that is, existing main weapons repackaged with different sub and special weapons, like the Tentatek Splattershot, actually surprised me quite a bit. See, a lot of the buzz I've been hearing from other Splatoon YouTubers recently is how disappointed they are in the number of new kits that have been added to Splatoon 3 thus far, and the fact that there weren't any alternate kits at launch. But when you look at the numbers, you'll actually find something really interesting. While, yes, it's true that Splatoon 2 had some alternate kits at launch, there were only 6 available before updates started rolling out, and that's only if you count the Firefin Splat Charger and Splatter Scope as different kits, since every kit for the Charger and E-Liter gets a matching one for its scope variant. Splatoon 2 would get an additional 35 kits in its first year, which is actually extremely close to the 39 alternate kits that have been added to Splatoon 3 so far. So while Splatoon 2 had 41 kits in total by this point, Here we're talking exclusively content that was added via updates, which means Splatoon 3 actually wins this category in terms of quantity. As for the quality of these kits, I'm not going to be giving a point, for a few reasons. The first being the sheer number of kits on display here is way too much information for me to sort through and form a cohesive opinion on, especially if I want to get this video out on time. It's already running late. The second being that I'm not the most knowledgeable about the competitive side of these games, which is especially ironic considering I'm supposed to be my team's captain. And the last being that the meta of these two games are so different that what may be considered good in one game is complete garbage in the other, or vice versa. And I haven't played Splatoon 2 in long enough to really look at it critically. So with that out of the way, let's get into the stages. Splatoon 3 released with 12 stages, and has added 8 more since launch, with each season containing one entirely new stage and one returning from the previous game, except for the current update where both stages are completely original. This makes for a grand total of 10 new stages and 10 returning. Meanwhile, Splatoon 2 added 13 stages to its initial 8, not counting Shifty Station, with 6 of these new stages being returning from the first game, and the remaining 7 being original, which means that the point for stage quantity must go to Splatoon 2, though both games are actually very close in total stage count at this point, with 3 having 20 stages and 2 having 21. And in terms of stage quality, it's really not even a contest. Splatoon 3 has notoriously had some problems with its map design, especially the completely original maps, plus infamously making stages worse via patches, placing random poles and signposts to make it much more difficult for people to snipe from safe locations, something that I take personal offense to as my team's anchor. There's also the fact that many of the stages being added are mostly flat, small, and have few branching routes, forcing the conflict in ranked modes to a few specific points on the map, and leaving the rest of the stage mostly untouched. The only real exceptions to this are Flounder Heights, a stage returning from the first game, and the 2 most recent original stages, Crab Leg Capital and Shipshape Cargo. Those 2 stages in particular are definitely a massive improvement over the past year of stages, and I really hope the devs take some cues from their positive reception to inform their future map design, and possibly some reworks of existing maps. Come on, Nintendo, please make Mahi Mahi better, I am begging you. This stage went from being my absolute favorite in Splatoon 1 to being one of my least favorites in this game thanks to how they butchered it. Anyways, Splatoon 2's additional maps are much more varied in terms of their design, much more competitively viable generally, and don't have many of the problems present in Splatoon 3's map design, poles. We have our smaller, flatter stages like Gobi Arena, but those stages are balanced out by highly vertical ones, like Arowana Mall and Schellendorf Institute, as well as sprawling stages with a bunch of different routes like Blackbelly Skate Park and Snapper Canal. This is of course helped by the fact that all of Splatoon 2's returning stages are from the first game, which was already a lot more chaotic and varied in its map design, whereas Splatoon 3 has pulled mostly from 2 for its returning stages. But even with all that considered, the point for stage quality must go to Splatoon 2. Next up is a mode that was actually introduced in Splatoon 2, Salmon Run. Salmon Run received minimal updates in its home game after launch, with only 2 additional stages being added in the first year, Lost Outpost and Salmonid Smokeyard. The mode did receive its first few Grizzco weapons though, those being the Blaster, Brella, and Charger. In terms of update quantity though, Splatoon 3 blows its predecessor's Salmon Run support out of the water. 3 additional stages have been added since launch, namely Marooner's Bay, Jammin' Salmon Junction, and Salmonid Smokeyard. However, 2 of these were pulled from the previous game, something Splatoon 2 was unable to do since the first game didn't feature this mode. Still, the third game has it beat in terms of content being added. It also added 3 of its own Grizzco weapons in addition to the 4 Splatoon 2 had when its updates were finished. The Grizzco Stringer, Splatana, and most recently, the Dualies. And finally, perhaps the biggest addition to Salmon Run has been the recurring Big Run events, of which we've had 4 so far. These happen approximately every 3 months, usually in the place of a Splatfest, and allow players to compete for the highest score on regular 4v4 maps, rather than the ones made specifically for Salmon Run. Oh, and did I mention the King Salmonids? We've only had 1 added via updates so far, that being the Ouroboros, but it adds some much needed variety to the battles against the Kings, and shows us that we'll likely be getting more of these in the future. And defeating these King Salmonids rewards you with fish scales, which can be used to purchase different collectibles, many of which have been added via updates, most notably differently colored variants of the slop suits and gloop suits, as well as gear that you can wear in 4v4 battles, stickers and collectibles to decorate your locker with, new nameplates, and that's not even mentioning the addition of extra work. Yeah, I think it's safe to say that Splatoon 3 gets a point not only for the Salmon Run quantity category here, but also for quality, Don't get me wrong, I like the stages and Grisco weapons that Splatoon 2 added, but it's extremely obvious that there's been a lot more effort put into Salmon Run in Splatoon 3. The original stages they've added are generally of a much higher quality than those from 2, I like these new Grisco weapons a lot more, and the addition of things like Big Runs and King Salmonids really makes Salmon Run feel like a core part of the game, and not just a fun side mode. The only real criticism I have is that the stages they've picked to return from Splatoon 2 aren't the ones I would have picked, but then again, they've only had 5 to pick from in the first place, and they've already brought over 3 of them. Now all I really need them to bring back is Ruins of Arc Polaris. And now that we're decently far into the video, this is the perfect time to remind you all to go ahead and splat that like button, and subscribe if you'd like to see more content like this. I try to upload every other Monday and alternate between making videos about Splatoon and other games, like my upcoming video on Goodbye Volcano High. I also have a Discord server and a Patreon, where you can support me and, in exchange, receive early access to some of my content, get special privileges in the Discord server, and eventually some exclusive live streams once we have enough people for it to be reasonable. Both the Discord and Patreon are linked in the description below. Also, sorry if my voice sounds a little bit weird, I'm getting over yet another cold because apparently my body does not want to give me a break. Anyways, back on the subject of Splatoon 3, we're going to be getting into some of the more miscellaneous additions here, so the scoring is about to get a little bit wonky. You've been warned. But first, let's get into perhaps one of the biggest aspects of these update cycles, new modes. While these have been added much less consistently and frequently than stuff like weapons and stages, they were a significant part of the updates nonetheless. In its first major update, Splatoon 2 added Clam Blitz, a new but contentious ranked battle mode, which, while fun in a competitive, coordinated setting where players can communicate directly with their teammates, becomes very chaotic and difficult in random queue, which is, the way most people play the game. The following major update, 3.0, introduced Rank X, an additional highest tier to its ranked battles, which implemented a direct scoring method called X-Power, allowing players to directly compare their skills to one another, and also featured a leaderboard accessible via the Nintendo Switch Online app. When Splatoon 3's update cycle was detailed more in the pre-launch Splatoon 3 Direct, 2 modes were announced to be returning from Splatoon 2, Rank X, which we've already discussed, and League Battles, which similarly to Rank X, calculated a league power for the entire group of players rather than just one. This mode also required teams to play in groups of 2 or 4, which made it a very popular way for competitive teams to practice and brush up on their skills, while also giving them a baseline that allowed them to compare themselves to other teams. And while this mode was promised to return, that didn't actually happen. Instead, League Battles were replaced with challenges, short 2-hour events that happen every few days and feature special conditions over the battles. These conditions include stuff like increased jump height, limited weapon selection, and a thick layer of fog covering the stage. And while challenges are fun, the fact that they outright replace League Battles, yet are so drastically different and only available at certain times, left a really bad taste in a lot of players' mouths, mine included. Sure, the functionality of the original League Battles was rolled into Anarchy Open, and it even still gives you a League Power rating if you're playing with a group of friends, but the fact that this is part of the solo queue kind of defeats the point and trivializes the ratings. The point of League Battles was that you were going up against other coordinated teams, rather than being teamed up with random people you can't communicate with. That being said, Rank X did get added in the form of X Battles, and it functions mostly the same, the only real difference here being that it's considered a separate mode from Ranked Battles, and thus has a different stage rotation. So in terms of quantity, Splatoon 2 and 3 actually tie when it comes to the addition of new modes, both adding X Battles plus one other mode. But with quality, the point has to go to Splatoon 2. While challenges are a significant addition to the game, the fact that they took the place of concept that could have easily been separate, especially content we'd already been told was returning, that makes me favor Splatoon 2's additions just a bit more. Next up, we're going to be discussing Splatfests, specifically the themes of each game's first year, and which game I think has had the better lineup so far. I'm not going to be doing a quantity ranking for these since Splatoon 3 has big runs taking the place of some Splatfests, giving Splatoon 2 an unfair advantage via technicality, not to mention the fact that Splatfests tend to run on a consistent monthly schedule anyways. I'm also going to be doing these based on the North American Splatoon 2 Splatfests only, since these are the ones that I participated in. This won't be an issue for Splatoon 3, since all of its Splatfests so far have been the same across all regions. This section is, of course, going to be highly subjective since it's, about fictional versus match themes that are in and of themselves highly subjective. But I do think there's a key flaw that sets one game's fests apart from the other. Splatoon 2's Splatfest themes in its first year were really fun. with your more standard Splatfests like Flight vs. Invisibility, Vampires vs. Werewolves, and Action vs. Comedy, but also some more off-the-wall ones like Pulp vs. No Pulp and Chicken vs. the Egg. One of the standouts was, of course, the crossover with Rise of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, with a 3 Splatfest bracket to determine that Donatello is objectively the best Ninja Turtle. Hey, that's just Splatfest law, guys, I'm just the messenger. And finally, for the game's 1-year anniversary, celebrating the recent release of Octo Expansion, which finally made Octolinks playable, they reignited a 100-year-old race war. Fun! Splatoon 3, meanwhile, has had the distinction of its Splatfest featuring 3 teams rather than 2, and so naturally, they've had to get a bit more creative with some of the themes. The chocolate, taste sensation, and crossover Splatfests with both Pokemon and The Legend of Zelda remain some of my favorite themes in the whole series. And of course, we have the 1-year anniversary Splatfest to determine who the leader of Deep Cut should be. At the time of me writing the script, that fest hasn't actually happened yet, but we all know who's gonna win the popularity category at the very least. However, with the introduction of these 3-team Splatfests, it feels like some of the themes haven't had as much work put into them as others. Particularly, the Deserted Island and Ice Cream Splatfests have had a clear winner from the get-go, meaning those teams were severely overpopulated and thus much more likely to win. In the first one's case, according to some fans, the theme was actually mistranslated in the game's English version, with the original Japanese version being meant of more as an island vacation rather than a deserted island. But because of this, Team Gear was extremely overpopulated because, logically, what else would you want on a deserted island? And this eventually led to their victory. The Ice Cream Splatfest was similar in the fact that one of the teams was the most generic and popular type of ice cream in the world, vanilla, while the other options were strawberry and mint chocolate. This, once again, led to one team being severely overpopulated and essentially having its victory ensured. Had it been changed to something like cookie dough to fit more in line with the other ice cream flavors, it would have been a much more fair competition. And then we have the most recent Splatfest as of me writing this, Money, Fame, and Love. This is a redux of a Splatfest from Splatoon 2, with a new team, Fame, shoehorned in. And the fact that this team was never meant to be a part of this theme is made apparent by its abysmal 9.10% popularity rating. And considering these themes with major issues make up a third of the Splatfests we've had so far in Splatoon 3, I'm gonna have to give the quality point to Splatoon 2. Now for another highly subjective topic, music. Splatoon 2 had batches of additional 4v4 battle music, one in the 2.0 update and another in the 3.0 update. 2.0 featured 3 songs from the Bottom Feeders and 2 from Ink Theory, while 3.0 added 2 more songs from the Chirpy Chips. I like a lot of these songs, with Seafoam Shanty and Wave Prism being my personal favorites, but in my opinion, they're nothing compared to Splatoon 3's added music. Though it took a little while for Splatoon 3 to get some new multiplayer music, not having any until the Sizzle Season 2023 update, they came out swinging with 3 songs from Yoko and the Gold Bazookas. Skablam and especially Rockagilly Blues are some of my personal favorite songs in the game so far. The current update also added 2 more songs, this time from H2O, Rip Stop and Go and Aquasonic, both of which are great. And though this might make it seem like Splatoon 3 hasn't added as much music as Splatoon 2 did, that's where you'd be wrong. See, we also got 2 brand new Splatfest themes, Liquid Sunshine and the brand new Big Betrayal, adding some much needed variety considering the game only launched with 2 Splatfest themes as opposed to its predecessor's 4. Still, better than the first game having only 1. So in terms of added music quantity, the 2 games actually tie, but I'm personally going to have to give my quality point to Splatoon 3, thanks to its variety in terms of genre and style. And finally, we have some of the more miscellaneous stuff. I'm not going to be awarding points for any of this just because of how different it is, but I figured it was worth noting. Of course, both games have added new gear with each major content update. This is primarily cosmetic, but they did of course have different main abilities and the like. This was a bigger deal in Splatoon 2 when you couldn't change the main abilities of your gear, but it's still relatively minor. Splatoon 2 also added a few new customization options, like hairstyles and legwear, and of course the paid Octo Expansion DLC, which added Octolinks as playable characters alongside an entirely new single-player campaign. Splatoon 3 has made a few smaller additions of its own, the most major one being the catalogs, each offering a limited time track of progression, allowing the player to unlock gear, locker decorations, and other goodies. Each new season has also added new table turp cards, usually including some new characters as well as the new weapons introduced in that season. And finally, the biggest update so far has been the addition of Inkopolis Plaza as an alternate hub for players who purchase the Splatoon 3 expansion pass, to tide people over until Side Order eventually releases. By now, I'm sure you're all curious as to which game won overall. And tallying up the points, it looks like... oh shoot, it's actually a tie! Gonna be honest, when I started scripting this, I expected them to be close, but I didn't expect them to be this close. Both games definitely have their strengths when it comes to how they've been updated so far, with Splatoon 3 being significantly stronger on the Salmon Run front, and having more variety with stuff like weapons and music, but Splatoon 2 was much better in terms of stages and Splatfests. When you look at them side by side, the amount of content added and the overall quality are extremely similar, just with the focus being put in different areas for each game. Really, the biggest difference between the two is the actual structure and frequency of the updates, with Splatoon 2 aiming for its much smaller weekly updates, and Splatoon 3 opting to release most of its new content in large chunks every few months. Which you like more is really a matter of personal preference. I just wish people would stop acting like Splatoon 3 is a huge departure from Splatoon 2 in terms of the quantity and quality of its updates. In many aspects, it's actually better. But with all that said, what can we expect from the future of Splatoon 3? Well, all we really know about is the second part of its paid DLC, the single-player campaign Side Order, a what-if scenario showing a world where Team Order won Splatoon 2's final Splatfest, rather than Team Chaos, which is something I'm extremely excited for, and not just because my favorite cephalopods are going to be in it. In terms of unannounced content I think we'll see, well, we've already had a new weapon of each type except the dualies, brellas, stringers, and splatanas added to the game, so I think we can mostly count on those getting new main weapons at some point. Likely in pairs of 2 for a couple different seasons, like they've been doing with the past few updates. I can't really see them adding any more main weapons past that though, except for maybe an extra splatana and or stringer, since those are this game's new main weapon classes. I don't think we'll be seeing any new special weapons either, considering this game already has 17 special weapons, significantly more than the 11 that were in Splatoon 2 by the end of its life. No, I think they'll mostly focus on pairing those specials up with different main weapons via alternate kits. Speaking of which, there's the question of if we'll be getting any third kits for weapons. And honestly, I couldn't tell you. About 2/3 of Splatoon 3's main weapons have gotten their second kits by now, which means that if they continue at this rate, they'll have given every weapon a second kit by Fresh Season 2024. Assuming the same 2-year update cycle that Splatoon 2 had, this gives around 1 or 2 more updates where alternate kits could be added, meaning that around 20 weapons could potentially get third kits. It would be really nice if they went out of their way to give every weapon a third kit, just for the additional competitive variety, but that's a wish list item. Speaking of a wish list, I do have some returning stages I'd like to see. The devs definitely seem to be prioritizing making Splatoon 2 stages return, likely because they're easier to port over than the Splatoon 1 stages, but there are 3 stages from that game that have yet to return at all. Urchin Underpass, Salt Spray Rig, and Bluefin Depot. Of these, I'd personally most like to see Salt Spray Rig return. This stage was notorious in the competitive community for being unbalanced, and actually had to be straight up removed from certain ranked mode rotations by Nintendo due to how unfair it was. But that just makes me think it has even more potential to be reworked. Plus, I just love the overall aesthetic, and I also love the stages that are parallel vertically rather than horizontally. As for another Splatoon 2 stage, my top pick would personally be the Reef. Given how many alternate routes the stage has, plus the verticality the central ditch and bridge give it, I think it'd work really well to balance out the current stage design Splatoon 3 is tended to favor, while also not being large enough to go against 3's stage design philosophy of pushing players closer together so they can get into more fights and get back into the action quicker. And finally, I do think there should be at least one stage featured in all 3 games, but the question is, which one? Well, realistically, as long as it's not Moray Towers, I'm happy. But my personal pick would be either Arowana Mall or Blackbelly Skate Park. We don't have many stages in Splatoon 3 with a lot of sloped terrain, and both of these stages address the flaws with this game's stage design in very different ways. Arowana Mall is one of the most vertical stages the series has had so far, while still being fairly straightforward, and Blackbelly is extremely wide with a ton of different routes. Finally, as I mentioned earlier, I'd really like to see Ruins of Arc Polaris return for Salmon Run. There's only 2 Salmon Run stages from Splatoon 2 that haven't been added to this game yet, the other one being Lost Outpost. And in my opinion, Arc Polaris was that game's best Salmon Run stage by a wide margin. If they only end up adding one more returning Salmon Run stage, I definitely want it to be this one. While we're talking about Salmon Run, I definitely think we'll be getting at least 2 more King Salmonids. Rounding it out to 4 just seems like a good number to me, and it gives them time to alternate between adding new Salmon Run stages and new King Salmonids. With that said, that's about it for today's video. Tell me in the comments down below which game's updates you've preferred overall. I personally like Splatoon 3's more just because it makes me feel like I'm not missing out if I don't play the game for a week or 2. I'm a busy college student, I can't play as often as I'd like to, plus I want to play other games too. Hope you all enjoyed my incoherent ramblings, have a lovely rest of your day, and stay fresh.